Hi Liz. Hi Em.
Hey Jack.
Hello. Welcome to Pipcast. We have a fun episode today. Well, we think it's going to be fun. Today we're chatting about tricky conversations or tricky situations with families within therapy. And the reason we thought we'd chat about this is because we know that therapy can be tricky in its own right, but often the trickier part is actually some of the conversations or things that come up within therapy. So we thought a fun way of kind of normalizing it for everyone, but also hopefully giving some tips and how we approach it is to chat about some scenarios. So we did ask on Instagram people to submit some questions and scenarios. So I'll kind of shoot through them and you can share your insights.
Sounds good.
Let's do it.
Are we ready?
Yeah. Ready.
So before we kick off with some questions, should we chat about just what it is about confronting or tricky conversations that make them hard in the first place?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think they can be tricky for lots of different reasons. Most recently, I feel that the conversations that I have with families that are tricky is when there's a real mismatch between my expert opinion, perhaps, and what the family is reporting. So often I have families that come in and they would really love the best outcomes as quickly as possible in therapy, almost wanting those quick fixes where it's like, hey, we've got this issue or this challenge at the moment with my child. Let's go to a couple of sessions. Let's fix it really fast, and let's move on to the next thing.
I think that's something early on in our career we don't expect as much is that differing of opinion or that mismatch in how therapy is going to look. That's absolutely something that makes it challenging.
And I think those conversations can feel really hard because they're often really quite emotionally loaded. And whether that's because it's understandably, the parent coming from a place of love and concern for their child, of course, but it's really emotionally loaded for them. And then maybe the way that they deliver information can come across in a certain way. And it can also be hard from the therapist's perspective of responding in a way that kind of is validating and hears their concern, but also, again, Liz, like you said, keeping that expert hat on and being able to sit in that feeling with them, but also deliver your clinical advice. It can be a really tricky trying to juggle those different hats.
It's a balance for sure, and I think the evidence-based kind of lens that we look through things, we also really need to consider the lived experience and the emotions. So keeping, that as a balance altogether.
I think something else that makes conversations tricky is needing to balance rapport as well. I think we know the importance of the family feeling comfortable with us and having that level of rapport. So when there is a mismatch or there is potentially a conflict in terms of differing opinions on things, it's really hard to navigate that, and that in itself makes it challenging.
It makes it so hard, and finding that balance between, being assertive and almost, sticking to your guns, for lack of a better term, of going, I know that this is what is clinically correct, but also maintaining that relationship, because again, we know if that rapport goes totally down the drain, then it doesn't really matter how good our clinical advice is. It's likely going to fall on deaf ears.
Also, if we're inexperienced, backing ourselves in terms of that clinical opinion is sometimes just causes a conversation to be challenging as well, because we have to, I guess, navigate that lack of confidence in what we're trying to convey as well. So, all right, should we jump into some scenarios? So one that came up was how do we approach it when families want to keep therapy going just to use up their funding?
Oh, I really struggle with that one. I tend to find that maybe you've got a family that have no immediate goals left, and perhaps they have the funding there for the next year. The NDIS plan doesn't roll over for another year, and they want to keep coming, maybe because they love you as a therapist, the child has fun in sessions, but we know that, I guess, therapeutically, there's nothing immediate. Like, they should be able to keep on tracking on at home and developing, as they are. So that is a tricky one, definitely, to navigate.
Yeah. How do you approach it, Em?
I think for me, and this is really hard to say because often these conversations are happening in hindsight, but after you've had a few of them, you do start to get really good at setting that expectation of what is OT, what do we use it for, and starting to set some of that groundwork for maybe when those functional goals are met. If there's no more, that's actually cause for success, and that's a really exciting time. And we almost want you to be able to eventually, hopefully, graduate OT, because that means things are feeling like your child is participating in what they need and want to do with more ease. So setting that expectation at the start, I now feel more confident in, maybe not so
it's
much
like
early career.
Painting done.
Yeah.
It's like, what does it look like when we feel like we're at a point where everything feels a little bit like it's we've reached equilibrium and we're doing okay?
Yeah. And it can also come up, when there maybe is that transitional period between fortnightly OT no longer being what's most appropriate, and maybe we don't need fortnightly sessions. But letting go of OT in its entirety can feel a bit scary, and it's a big jump. So thinking about what other transitional supports can I offer the family, whether is it we jump down to consultancy-based appointments, would, some further school observations so we can make sure all of our ducks in a row there are finished.
Yeah.
How are we going to ease that transitional period?
Planning in advance.
Yeah, absolutely. And letting the family know that if something does come back up again, this doesn't have to be goodbye forever. We will, you know where to find us. But for now, this is an exciting time.
Something else that I often think about is the fact that sometimes families don't think that there's a negative to continuing with therapy either.
Yeah,
and
sure.
There can actually be, in that by a child being in therapy, sometimes there is that idea that they haven't achieved or they haven't met. So it can be that we're kind of moving the finish line or not letting them actually celebrate their wins and their achievements by continuing with therapy. So I think sometimes highlighting to the family that there is pros and cons as well to continuing, and that they may not be aware that just by coming to sessions to use up the funding or appear that they still need therapy so they can secure more funding. And a lot of that is the anxiety of the family, and we can understand that and validate that. But that, there is actually negatives to attending therapy for no reason as well.
That's a really good point. And I don't know if I'd considered that when we were kind of prepping for this episode in like such a way, but no, that's a really fair thing to be bringing up to families at this time. What else could you guys do with this extra time in your week? And how's it going to be supportive for the child to be like, actually, like, look at how far you've come. This is great.
And reassuring them that if and when they do need therapy, that you'll be there to help them navigate that, and we can re-secure funding if we need to. I mean, we hope we can.
We hope, yeah.
And that we share their hope that they won't actually need it.
Yeah.
But I guess worrying or just continuing with therapy indefinitely in the chance that we may is not in itself a good enough reason.
Yeah.
And having those clear conversations is helpful.
Yeah.
What about when a child will only engage with you and you're not best placed to support them? So, for example, they're, for us, coming to access OT, but really they need treatment with a psychologist, for example. How do we navigate that one?
I think the open and honest conversations that you were just talking about before is probably the biggest thing. And I often find that I instate or I re-talk about like what is the role of OT, and I do it with the child and I do it with the family, like the parents as well. And I guess through that help them to coach them and help them to identify, do we feel like this is the right, I guess, service for them at this moment in time, and then reassuring them again, perhaps when they do have some more psych input, or perhaps it's an OT in the home, that if they need to come back to OT for the clinic-based sessions at KidLink, they definitely can as well.
What about when they won't see another practitioner? Because that's something that we also see, that the family's like, okay, maybe you're not the best professional, but you're the only one they'll agree to. So it's better than nothing, that kind of approach.
I think clear handovers is probably something that we would do from a procedural point of view. Like if they are moving to another therapist, ensuring that new cycle, that new OT understand and know the child, and also the things that have worked well for me with that child in therapy. They also are aware of those things as well. But yeah, it's a tricky time, and I think it's very situational a bit too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very tricky. I think one of the challenges is often that we feel like we're abandoning the child as well. If they're not going to engage with anyone and we know it's not within our scope in terms of what they need, but we feel like it becomes tricky because it can feel like we're kind of gatekeeping a little bit. It's like, well, for you to continue to engage in OT safely and appropriately, we need to have these other care team members on board. So it's kind of saying, well, if you don't engage with the psychologist, then we won't engage with you. And that sits incredibly uncomfortably as well. But one of the analogies that I use with more inexperienced OTs when we're toying with this is that, is it okay to continue to see a GP for a toothache just because you like the GP and you maybe have a phobia of the dentist? And I feel like it's obviously not the same, but it's quite a similar situation for us, I think, when we're supporting families and it starts to become really not clinically indicated that we're involved or that we're the only people that are involved.
Yeah.
What about you, Em?
I love that analogy. I think I'm going to put that in my back pocket and use it. Thank you so much. But look, I totally agree. And I guess another factor that does make it really hard is like we know wait lists are super long and we know it can be easier said than done to say you should just go see this professional because that might not always be really realistic. But I totally agree with what Alyssa said. It really comes back to echoing of, well, what is my role? My role is that functional participation. And right now what you're telling me says X, Y, Z, and you'd be more suited for this service. And having that clear plan with them of if you want to come back, you can, but this is my clinical recommendation. And having the assertiveness to stand by that.
Backing yourself, for sure.
Yeah.
And really working around it flexibly, I think. Sometimes it is like I can be part of the care team or I can provide some parent coaching around how I can support you, but I can't work with this child one-on-one at the moment. They're not therapy ready. It's not going to be beneficial. And in some cases it may be detrimental. So I think thinking flexibly, can we look at school supports? Can we do other things and still be involved as we're planning? And sometimes that's not appropriate, but I think really zooming out and being like, what does this child and this family need and how can I best get them there without stepping outside of my scope?
Yeah, and I think, you've used the term therapy ready and that kind of makes me think that often when I think about it, often if I explain this to families and explain this is my reason why for saying this is not because your child is too hard. This is not because the situation is too complicated. This is because your child is not therapy ready and I want them to be. So this is how you need to get them there, and explaining that really clearly to the families, I think is super beneficial to these conversations feeling easier.
And it's nice when kids do like us, and in the same vein, we really like working with certain families. So sometimes separating from that long-standing relationship is tricky for both parties. Yeah. So acknowledging that and sitting in that discomfort as well and being empathetic to the situation for both parties is important.
It's a good way to go forward, yeah.
Yeah. What about when families have lots of complex goals? It's almost the flip side of the previous scenario. So they have tons of goals, or it's a very complex family or a complex child in terms of their support needs, but there is limited funds to attend long term.
I think safety is probably the first thing that I think of. If there's lots of goals and they are quite complex, are we the best service to provide and make sure that the child is, I guess, safe is probably my first consideration. And thinking about are we the best way forward? Do we need to just prioritize one goal to focus on at a time? But do they have the ability to do that with the funding that they have? I do spend lots of time, talking to families around how can they access Medicare rebate plans and that sort of thing, or NDIS. But what do we do if that isn't an option? It is quite challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree in terms of the whole, what's the biggest priority? We can't work on everything at once because we're going to make no progress towards anything. So if we could change one thing, what would that be? And from my experience, I often find that works really well in having that set up with the family that, yes, we're going to do some work with the child if it's a child-related goal, but also how can you upskill the family so that they can continue working on this outside of their 5 sessions, and that it doesn't just stop with us here in the clinic, but we can keep working on these things at home, and I can try and set you guys up for success as best as I can to keep developing these skills.
It's so important to set effective goals, isn't it? And really involve the family in the planning of how we're going to address those goals and over what frequency and duration, because I think sometimes therapists just jump in without having those conversations about how long are you planning on coming to therapy.
Yes.
And we start to dive in like we'll be seeing them for a year, and then 5 sessions in, they're like, oh, we've used all our sessions and we're not planning on continuing and we haven't seen any progress. But the way we have approached that family has not been individualized. We haven't had those clear conversations. So it means that we've almost set ourselves up for failure, and also put unrealistic expectations on the family as well. So I think having those open, often uncomfortable conversations about this is actually what you can expect from 5 sessions and these are the options. I think personally and professionally, this is how you should use those 5 sessions, whether it is parent consult, whether it's a school visit, whether it's providing wraparound services to, referring on and those kinds of things, versus just getting started on a huge emotional regulation goal and then realizing that we've made very little progress because we're 2 sessions in and they're done.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think in that, an important point to make is making sure that you as a therapist are really well versed in, if they're accessing, say, a CDMP or a BAM plan, what that entails and what they're entitled to. For example, with a CDMP, not saying, great, let's do 5 parent sessions, leave the kid at home or with the other parent or caregiver.
Because they have to attend.
Because they have to attend, and then you've got another tricky conversation on your hand that, sorry, you can't use that one.
Yeah, for sure. I liked how you guys were saying that being able to have the family, like step by step, understand the plan of like, we've got 5 sessions, and I guess trying to give them skills or concepts that are the most transferable so that perhaps the parent understands them and knows what that looks like, so that they can be doing that at home as well, without us needing to be there fortnightly, if that's not an option.
What happens when parents have really high expectations of OT? Because I feel like that flows on from what we were just talking about, and they have limited capacity to do anything outside of therapy. Lisa's maybe a bit distracted. Macy has just made a cameo for those that are watching
and
on
Macy
the video.
is the dog for any new listeners. I'll take this while you're busy, Liz. So what was the question? Sorry, what happened? Now I'm distracted by Macy.
So high expectations for OT sessions, but limited capacity, or the family has limited attendance, or how do we manage that?
So I think, and at least in our practice context, kind of falling back on explaining to the family that, look, we've got 45 minutes every 2 weeks. You have all the other hours in your week. And 45 minutes fortnightly is not enough time to make progress on, I want to say, almost any skill. Like, we really need it to be practiced outside of the clinic. And also explaining really clearly to the families that my presumption is not the fact that you want your child to come in here and regulate. You want your child to be able to regulate at home, at school, at kinder, at Woolworths. So that's where that reciprocal conversation needs to come in of, how are we going to make this happen for you guys? And I think also welcoming when families say, look, we didn't do the recommendations, we didn't do the strategies, and actually saying, you know what, thank you for letting me know. How can we work together to find a way for this to transfer in your child's everyday lives so that it is accessible for you guys? If there is that limited capacity, how can we work together to use the capacity that you do currently have?
Yeah, I do that a lot actually, and talking to the parents about who are their network or who are their support people as well. So making sure that the parents have support within that, and even considering, like, is uncle or grandma really around and available and would be able to, I guess, come to sessions consistently and be able to spend time during the week, during that fortnight that you've said, implementing some of the things that we've spoken about. Like, do we need to think about other people in the child's life that they would be able to help with implementing therapy outside of the 45 minutes in a fortnight, those sorts of things.
I really like that. I think I often explain to families what the stages of learning actually are, and that we're doing the skill acquisition or the knowledge part, but there's then a practice part, which is sort of both of us, and then there's the generalization, and that those stages are quite time intensive, and that, you know, they're not going to be able to take what they've learnt within therapy and generalize it outside of therapy without those supports in place. So that can look different for every family, but how can we make that work for you?
Yeah, and I think talking about repetition, and often children do need a lot of repetition and a lot of exposure and a lot of conversations to be able to master the skill. And I think highlighting to the fact that in 50 minutes, there's only so much repetition that we can do, and it isn't actually our role as well. So helping the parents to be able to kind of go, okay, in our everyday weekly routine, how can we implement some of the things that Alyssa's talked to us about really realistically between, you know, brushing our teeth and going to bed? Are we going to implement a strategy between that up the hallway of our heavy work activity before we go to bed, and those sorts of things? Like, make it as realistic and as easy as possible as well.
And for some skills, the best approach is actually modeling.
Yeah.
So for certain things like regulation strategies, and it really does involve the parent learning and being able to model. So often we can't get away with just teaching the kid tools within session. The parent needs to be involved, and there needs to be an element of parent capacity building as well. So how are they going to make that happen, and making sure that we're working with them on what's tangible and also what's achievable?
Yeah, I do often as well. Sometimes it can be confronting for the parents, but I get them to almost not so much run a session, but run a part of the activity and get them to model to me how they would cope with that or how they would manage that at home. So winning and losing a particular game, I'll get them to, I guess, essentially win the game, and then I see how they, or perhaps I've modeled it in a previous session, get them to then go, you know, could you take over for me and show me how you would manage that, validating the feeling and I guess redirecting and having strategies that will help the child de-escalate in those situations as well.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Remembering that it's our job to remember that the family is also acquiring skills and generalizing.
And the caregivers need some practice too.
So they're learning and they're watching us do things in theory, and they're like, oh, that makes sense. But actually giving them the skills to practice with support, and then also generalize alongside their child. We're dealing with really complex layers when we're supporting complex families.
Definitely.
All right. We also have, how do we talk with families who don't fully see their child's difficulties, or when they're reporting that only others are seeing the challenges?
This can be a really hard one, and I feel like one I often see when we've got maybe school or kinder reporting different difficulties. And in that example, that's where I often find myself kind of actually breaking that down with the family and going, I hear you, like that can often be the case. And where my brain goes with my professional knowledge is I'm wondering about A, B, and C. What do you think? What does this look like at home versus at kinder? What could the reasons for the differences be? You know, for example, if we're talking about winning and losing again, if we're just losing to mum and it's a controlled environment and our regulation needs are met, that might feel easier versus if it's in, you know, a big group in front of 20 other kids and I'm just stressed and I'm hungry and there's too much noise. Like, what else could be going on for the child, and figuring that out together?
Yeah, I think parents come often to me and go, oh, kinder have reported that I do need to go and get my child assessed. And what do you think about that? And I am hesitant to answer the question straight away without hearing their thoughts on that. So kind of, you know, coaching them to give me an answer around, is it something that they find confronting? Do they agree with it? Is it something that they're open to? And yeah, putting my coaching hat on to be like, where to from here? And I often reassure as well in those moments after the validation, kind of reassuring as well that they're already engaged in a service in OT, and hopefully that is helping their child with the goals that perhaps kinder have identified and why they need to be assessed, and just reassuring them that no matter if there was a diagnosis there or not, that for us, we're going to be working towards the same goals. It doesn't change my, I guess, perception on the child, but down the track, it may be helpful for the child to understand their brain and, you know, why are things more tricky for me, or what does ASD mean for me, and those sorts of things. So lots of validating, lots of reassuring and that kind of thing in those conversations, I think, for me.
We also see inconsistencies even between parents and within households, don't we? How can that
Definitely.
impact?
It's so interesting. I think sometimes you have a parent that may be more open to it or further down the journey, their journey of neurodiverse affirming kind of things and being open to a diagnosis compared to another. Often I love to have parent coaching sessions where they're in together and getting to hear both sides of the story often without the child being there, so we can speak freely is often a good strategy, because it is interesting to hear people come from different walks of life, and people are more open to it than not, I think. And so hopefully getting them to meet in the middle is always the aim and the goal, with the child's functional participation in mind, definitely.
Yeah. And I think even, if we're just bringing it back to, things like different behaviours in the home or different levels of participation with different parents or different key people in the kid's life. You're so right, Liz, in us having all of those different experiences and then breaking down with, the different key adults going, well, how does that look like for you? How would you typically respond? How do you respond? What looks different between that? And, not to psychoanalyze all of our families way too much, but actually like starting to break it down, looking at attachment, looking at co-regulation concepts, looking at does one parent tend to fall more weak and find it harder to hold the boundaries, and one parent tends to fall more mean, and then we get different kind of patterns of responses with different families, and actually helping them to understand that no, it makes sense maybe what you are saying and what you're seeing, and this is why, and this is how we can support knowing that.
And highlighting that consistency and persistency is key for two
Yes.
parents as well.
Yeah.
So hopefully they are getting this similar kind of reactions and things like that, and making sure that they're on the same team, I think, to support the child.
A lot of it does come down to coaching too, and this is what makes them hard, because we're balancing rapport. So it's not as simple as saying, I think you're a little bit mean, or
No.
I think you're too weak. That's
Yes.
what makes it challenging, is how do we actually have these conversations and meet the family with where they're at. And I think that's why we focus so much on, we have our caregiver connection group, and because self-reflection in parenting is so important. That's why we love Circle of Security so much as well.
Yes.
We'll pop that in the speaker notes if
Yeah.
you want to look into it, because it is a reflective program, and we can take a lot of those principles one-on-one with families and get them to think about why they do parent in that way. And we actually have a booster on that topic as well, because it's not easy to help parents to explore why they do parent a certain way and why they may or may not be seeing certain behaviours that the other parent does.
And I think that links up to what we said initially, is that often these tricky conversations are fueled by emotions. And often we're talking about hard things of being like, how were you parented and how do you think that's influencing how you're parenting? And it can be quite confronting, I think, for parents, definitely. So Circle of Security stuff is very important.
Also agreeing that we're all here because we all actually want the best for the child. So somebody has highlighted that there's something functionally going on and that the child needs support. So I think leaning on that is also important, because I think sometimes parents want to think that they'll, we regularly hear, oh, but I had those same difficulties when I was a child, and wanting to think that it'll rectify itself. And that two things can be true, can't they? That it can be that you also struggled with those things, and that we can also help you to reflect on that and help your child to potentially not experience as many challenges as you did in that area.
I think even, and bringing it back to having these tricky conversations, right? We've just spoken a lot about parent coaching and unpacking things with families. But then if you add on the layer of like, oh, but I just want you to work with my child, for example, and being a peds clinic, we hear this all the time. And it's all of the layers of the tricky conversations on top of that. Like, how do you even get to a parent coaching sessions with maybe families who don't want to be engaged actively in therapy? And that adds all of those layers.
It is very tricky, isn't it?
It's so hard.
And we often get as well, like, you don't need to talk to me. Just do some therapy with my child. And I think that's really tricky, going back to, in 45 minutes of the fortnight, we need to know what else has been going on. And I think highlighting the fact that the parent is a really key role as a really key part to play in the puzzle of all of the goals that we are working on with the child, that talking to them at the beginning of the session or at the end of the session is really, really important, and getting them involved is good too.
We kind of hide behind our service agreement a little bit. Oh, yes, don't we? Like, we have really clear expectations that it's actually part of our therapy. So you're doing it whether you like it or not. And then we hope that once we have them in the room that we can win them over.
For sure.
But sometimes it is hard to just get them in the room, isn't it? Or there is a lot of resistance. And even within the day-to-day, like you are doing a therapy session, for lack of a better description, with the child, there's often resistance even around certain activities.
Yeah.
Yes, we were, I think, talking before, and we were saying the examples were when we sometimes get, oh, don't worry about the warm-up, just get straight into handwriting. Don't worry about playing a game at the end. Just do 50 minutes of handwriting. And having, I can only assume it comes from a place of wanting to make the most of our time together and really wanting to work on these goals. I don't doubt that one bit. But I think us being able to communicate really clearly to parents why we do what we do, why a warm-up at the start is so important for the child's regulation. And also, how can we translate this to at home when you guys are sitting down to do your homework, or at school when they're trying to sit down to do their homework but they really need a movement break, and that might be an impacting factor, and making that really clear.
Yeah, I think I tend to find myself often like observing out loud as well, just being like, oh, I've noticed, Emily, that after you moved your body through the tunnel, you've been like so great at sitting down to do your handwriting and that kind of thing. So I try to highlight and observe so that the family can also see that that movement warm-up that we did was actually very beneficial to get us sitting down to do our handwriting.
Yeah. I like to make the invisible visible.
That's
too.
a great
If
one.
I'm worried about the family thinking a certain thing, I'm someone who just likes to put it on the table, and I will say, you may be thinking that this is a bit of a waste of time. Are you thinking that?
Yeah, cool.
Because I like to just be able to have that conversation. If I see them looking at me a bit sideways, I just like to air that. I like to say some families report that, they really don't like the parent component early on because it feels like a bit of a waste of time. Do you have worries about that? So that they have that opportunity to actually say, yes, actually. I'm like, can we talk about that a little bit more? Because I think that just sitting in the discomfort of trying to win the family over without just putting it out there can sometimes just be, well, in my opinion, a waste of time.
Yeah,
but
I
also
joke.
just I guess detrimental to progress. Yeah.
I joke all the time that I'm like, if I do my job right, I'm going to work myself out of a job. So if I'm saying that to a parent of a 4 or 5-year-old, they are the person that will take over my role in the home environment. So I do use that joke quite often, especially in my intakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even in that example before, of like just putting it out on the table, I think a really common example of that uncomfortable feeling can be in those really early rapport building sessions where it feels like 50 minutes of playing games and 50 minutes of not doing a whole lot of beneficial stuff. And I think that's another time where it's really important that we are really clearly communicating with families. This is what I'm doing. This is why. There is benefit in this, and I'll explain it to you. But I want you to trust me. And I'm not just wanting to play a game for fun. I'm looking at this skill and this skill and this skill, for example. And I want to build that rapport so that they will come back and see me. And it's not a fight to get them in the car every 2 weeks, and going through some of those possible uncomfortable thoughts and questions.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I think that's really nice. I've got a few quick ones at the end that might be things that families that you may hear or you may see. One of them flows off the back of what you just said, and when a family says to you, why are you just playing? What do you say?
I would say what I basically just said. I'd highlight the skills that we're looking at and why rapport is so important for our therapeutic outcomes.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm exactly the same.
I don't want you to talk to me anymore. I want you to just do therapy.
Ouch. That one's really tricky. Going back to what we're saying before, it does actually happen quite often is, having their input in it. I think actually a really good thing is highlighting the importance of having these conversations, but when in the session do you feel like it would be most beneficial? Is it when you walk straight through the door and the kid has time to play by themselves? Or if that doesn't work and we feel like we're going to, lose the child's attention, do we want to do it at the end? Do you want to have a phone call before the session? Do you want to email me before as well if you don't want to waste your 50 minutes talking to me?
I like it. You're giving them some controlled choice there.
Definitely.
Very good.
We've been coming for a while and nothing has really changed.
This is a hard one.
I say while loosely because sometimes that can be two or three sessions. Yeah.
I think this is really dependent on my judgment as well, and I'm going to try and keep this short. But if I feel like nothing has changed and they are saying that as well, that isn't a conversation we need to have. Something's not working. The homework's not working well. My recommendations are off, or we're working on the wrong skill, or there's something else.
It's so disarming for families to hear, I agree.
It is,
Isn't it? It's like, I hear you.
Yes, thank you for telling me.
I actually wanted to have a conversation about that myself.
Yep.
Let's revisit. Let's sit down. We're a team.
Yep. That sounds good.
But I think that's good because I forget the exact analogy. I think I'll probably butcher it, but it's almost putting the conversation between you, in front of you. It's joining them in that.
Yeah, I guess between you or in front of you, not across from you.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like the problem's over here. It's not me having a problem with you.
Yes.
It's like, let's tackle this over here together as a team.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Cool.
I don't know what my goals are. Isn't it your job to tell me?
I have a wonderful example for this. I've had a family a while ago where we use the analogy often like the tooth analogy in the doctor's office, where you would often walk into the doctor's being like, I have this trouble. I have a splitting headache. I have a sore tooth. I've rolled my ankle. And then it's the doctor's, ability to go, okay, let's put these things in place. And sometimes I think people get referred to OT and they don't really know what we are or why. And they then come and they kind of sit back and you ask them all these questions and they go, yeah, but shouldn't you be able to tell me what's wrong with my child? And I think we don't assess to then find lagging skills and then intervene. We want you to come, the families to come to us with functional things that their child isn't able to participate in, and then we work on the goals from there. We can't just, have a couple of assessments and go, oh yeah.
Potentially controversially, I have a real issue with OTs that actually just do a battery of standardized assessments as part of their intake. That in itself I find very unsettling, but then to also not have a huge parent component of that where you're actually finding out what's important to them and what's going on. And I just think that, that's not what we do. And I think that therapists that are doing that are almost feeding that rhetoric that there is some standardized assessment that can tell us not just what's going on, but why it is. And that's actually just irresponsible. So
I often highlight to the fact that the family and the child and the parents and the caregivers are the expert on the child, and I'm the expert on OT concepts and child development and that kind of thing. So I'm not going to be able to tell you what's wrong with your child. You're here for a specific reason.
Yeah, we need context. Even with things like handwriting where there's potentially more standardized assessments, there still is a huge component of information gathering that we should be doing. Yeah. I know you have another example, Liz, about a family basically coming in and saying, it's your job to tell me. What was the analogy that family had?
The family used the analogy. They asked me if I was an electrician and if they knew how the aircon in the building was running. And I said, no, I'm sorry, I don't. And the family then highlighted, I'm the electrician, like I can tell you that it's fine. So you should be able to tell me, is my child, working at a good level or are they not? And that was a really tricky, odd conversation to have because I'm like, your child's definitely not a machine. And I'd love for you to come forward and say, hey, we've noticed that this is really tricky. Like morning routine's really hard. You can't, just come because the teacher said so, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's so inherent to our work, isn't it? And so we have to be really careful that we're setting that expectation and bringing it back to function and being really affirming that we're not here to identify problems and fix problems. We're here to support participation.
Yeah.
And if the family doesn't see any participation challenges, that we need to set that really clearly from the get-go and not revert to just doing a whole stack of standardized assessments to find things.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah.
And I feel like bringing it back to like some really, I guess, almost like playful but strengths-based examples can be really helpful, like from a practicality standpoint when this comes up for me in session of going like, I would hate to spend 12 months working on bike riding for your kid if you cannot get them to brush their teeth and they haven't brushed their teeth in 3 weeks. Like, what's going to be the biggest thing that's most important for you guys? This kid might not even have a bike. Why am I picking goals and working on things that I think might be important? But there could be so much more going on for you guys, and I don't want to waste your time.
No.
I don't want to waste my time.
It's not very family-centered though
No,
either, is it?
It's not. But I think, you know, and that's a bit of a silly example, but figuring out what's meaningful participation going to look like for you guys, because that's actually what my job is. It's for your child to do the things that they need and want to do and that you need and want them to do, and not just bike ride for the sake of it, you know?
Because they, in one standardized test, it said that they couldn't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So in parting, any broad tips for clinicians who are listening thinking, I really find these conversations difficult? Where should they go? What could they do?
I think there's something that we haven't touched on, and I only want to touch on it briefly because we're at the end, but also that sometimes that discomfort, it sucks and it's really uncomfortable, but that is okay. And sometimes conversations just feel uncomfortable. And that doesn't mean you're a bad therapist. It might actually mean you're being a really good therapist in that moment.
We expect kids to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We need to do the same.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
Yeah, making the invisible visible, and I think rapport, definitely. Like feeling as though the family can trust you professionally is a really big thing. And we spoke a little bit about swapping the hats between your coaching, so kind of supporting the family to kind of lead them to an answer or get them to speak about their experiences, but also mixing that with, you know, what we would clinically recommend, like what is the evidence kind of telling us about this particular situation as well.
Doing some training on coaching.
Yeah,
That's
I was
a great
about
one.
to
I think
say,
that's
if people are
good
interested,
tip.
Jackie Snyder's work is what we often come back to at KidLink, and she's fantastic, and we're always stealing that hat analogy of hers, so that's a good one.
Definitely.
Quality supervision.
Oh,
Yeah, if you're finding that a lot of these conversations are feeling really tricky really often.
Yeah, and really overwhelming, because some of these scenarios are really quite heavy, especially if your caseload is quite complex.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also a really nice opportunity. Nice is probably not the right word, but to normalize that actually sometimes this is really hard. Sometimes this feels really difficult, and that's not a you thing. This can be a really hard job sometimes.
I think another point that we said was the planning in advance, and making it really clear that paint done, what does it look like throughout therapy, where do we want to get to, and really making sure that we do stick to the goal that we had kind of initially spoken about in the term, at the beginning of the term, because I find that often parents do have so many goals and then they can change between goals, and then that we can then talk about, we haven't made any progress in anything. And that's another tricky conversation within itself. So planning.
There will be times where sessions are uncomfortable if we're doing our job right.
That's true.
Yeah, our job isn't necessarily to be liked.
No.
As much as we want to, I think a lot of people go into a job like this because they want to be helpful and they're people, but also remembering like that in itself means we are working with people, and that isn't always easy and comfortable and straightforward. And that's,
I agree with you.
It's okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us on Pipcast.
Thanks,
Alyssa
Jackie.
and Emily. It's been a pleasure chatting. It's been a bit of a longer episode, but one I've really enjoyed. So thanks for joining, and hopefully you'll be back next time.
Thanks, Jack. See ya.
Bye.